Hello everybody, welcome to A British Audiophile. If you're new to this channel, my name is Taran. Let me start today with a little word association game. I'll throw out some phrases and you make a note of the first thing that pops into your head. So let's get started. Sports car, luxury watch, musical subwoofer. Now I'll tell you my selections, if you tell me yours, let me know in the comments section. For sports car, I selected Porsche. Not surprising really, I worked for that brand for 5.5 years. For luxury watch, I selected Rolex. I've never really been known for having a great deal of imagination. And for musical subwoofer, I selected REL. And I bet a number of you selected the same thing. But why is that? When I was first seriously getting into hi-fi, that had been around the early 1990s, and I was still periodically working in a hi-fi store around that time. Home cinema was all the rage, and it seemed that everybody was buying subwoofers to augment their surround sound systems. Everybody apart from traditional audiophiles. They wouldn't allow a boombox anywhere near their prized 2-channel system. That perception changed slowly over a period of time when REL came on the scene. Richard E. Lord launched a range of subwoofers that was aimed squarely at the audiophile and became prized for their timing and ability to seamlessly integrate into a 2-channel system. There was no doubt that getting that right took time, effort, a great deal of patience, and quite frankly, was a royal pain in the jacksie. Now, for you non-British people out there, I'm sure you can guess what that means. But once you got it dialed in, the benefits of having a subwoofer were unquestionable. And for me, there was no going back. I had to have one. I bought one way back then. The REL Strata III. It retailed for around £800 in the premium finish. I think there was also a standard finish available which retailed for around £600, but I'm not entirely certain. Punch that into an inflation calculator today and you're looking at around £1,000 to £1,200. REL was sold back in 2005 to the Americans, but the values of the company have remained the same, even though the designs have changed quite a bit. I'm taking a look at the REL T7X that retails here in the UK for around £1,000. Even though it's quite a bit smaller than my Strata III, it could be considered a direct replacement, not only in terms of price, but also when you look at the measured performance in terms of the specifications. We'll get into that a little bit later. The question I really wanted answered was, how much has the subwoofer game moved on since I purchased my Strata III over 20 years ago? I found out exactly that, and I hope you come along for the ride. The REL T7X will set you back exactly £999 in the UK. It's pretty close to being a 14-inch, 350mm cube, the height just being a little bit less at 12.6 inches or 320mm. Available in a gloss white finish and a gloss black, but no wood finishes, which REL state is due to the complexities of matching with main speakers, but I still think is a shame. Owners will be under no uncertainty that they've purchased a REL subwoofer. Boy do they like their branding. It's everywhere, on the feet, on the back, on the top, and if you remove the front grille, it's on the 8-inch 200mm long throw driver too. Underneath there's a 10-inch 250mm passive radiator. There's that logo again. Both drivers are REL's proprietary fibre alloy construction. It's basically a composite of air-dried paper cone stiffened by a substantial inverted aluminium dust cap to try and find the ideal balance between lightness, stiffness and damping. I know I've been poking fun at the branding, but the top inlaid aluminium badge is not just there for effect, it's there to dampen the cabinet resonance peak, the dimensions and mass being unique to each subwoofer in REL's range. The 200-watt Class AB MOSFET plate amplifier dominates the rear panel. There are adjustments for the gain, volume in plain English, and adjustments for the crossover point between 30 and 120 Hz. You're encouraged to use the high-level input connection. The supplied cable has a Nutrix speak-on connector for the subwoofer end and bare wires to connect to one of your amplifier speaker terminals. Or you could crimp the red and yellow wires together and connect to the back of one of your speakers. Low bass tends to be mono. Just make sure if you're doing that you don't have a balanced amplifier. Let me just interject here for a moment. There's some benefits to using the high-level input connection. You give the sub the opportunity to take on some of the timing and sonic characteristics of your power amplifier, and that way you should be able to achieve better integration with your main speakers. But there's another important reason. You're engaging REL's high-level input filter. They're known for that filter, and they go to great lengths to protect it so that other manufacturers can't copy it. The circuit for the filter itself is encased in a kind of epoxy resin. One of the concerns that people have using the high-level input connection is that it will draw power from the amplifier. That isn't a worry. There's a very low-level signal that's taken from it. There is a regular low-level RCA input to connect to the sub or pre-outs of your amplifier if for whatever reason you can't or don't want to use the high-level input. There's also an LFE connection with its own gain control to connect to the back of the LFE output of your AVR. This means you can have an independent setting for music and another one to deal with the crash bang wallop of movies. Those of you who are regular viewers of this channel will know that I'm not a big fan of flowering things up when it comes to talking about sound quality. I much rather give it to you direct. Quite frankly, there's only so many things you can talk about before you start getting into the realms of audiophile BS. I do, however, want to go into some very specific details when we're talking about the setup of this subwoofer and what to listen for. I do think that's quite important, but I'll talk about that in the setup section. Here, I'm just going to keep things relatively general. It's the articulation in bass in the REL T7X that's mighty impressive, what you could describe as bass definition. It allows you to hear subtle textures, little reverberations within the bass notes themselves that most subwoofers would homogenize. This is what you'd expect from a very good small subwoofer, it to stop and start quickly. Bigger subwoofers will definitely play louder and dig deeper, but that isn't always the primary objective, certainly when it comes to music anyway. That's why quite often you're better off with two smaller subwoofers rather than one larger one. As for my REL Strata III in comparison, it sounds slow and ponderous. That's borne out by the specifications. The global feedback delay is around 16 milliseconds on my Strata III. It's half that on this modern REL. Is that important? You bet it is when it comes to grip and control. We are able to detect impulses as little as 4 milliseconds apart. My Parac Response 1 SEs tend to roll off naturally just below 50 Hz in my room. Plugging in the T7X extends the response to around 30 Hz. That's pretty much identical to what I get with my REL Strata III, so there's no real difference between these two subwoofers when it comes to bass extension. There's a little bit of difference between the dynamic capability of these two subwoofers as well, even though I should imagine that the maximum SPL level is very similar at around 100 dB. So what do I mean by that? Well, dynamics is the difference between the quiet and the loud passages of music, and you can compensate for this a little bit by turning the gain up. If you overcook it, you upset the tonal balance of your system. It just sounds bass heavy and thick. So what I'm referring to here is the impactfulness of the bass. The overall bass weight between the Strata III and the T7X is very similar, but because the transients are delivered quicker on the T7X, it just feels more impactful. Greater bass weight, deeper extension, more dynamics, these are things you'd expect the REL T7X to add to your sonic presentation, but there's something else as well. A sense of space. The soundstage opens up in terms of width as well as depth. Now it could be that there's some low-level ambient information in recordings that's very subtle that filters through, or it could be a psychoacoustic effect. Low frequencies are associated with large spaces. Perhaps that's what's happening. I'm not a neuroscientist. Perhaps someone with a relevant specialism could shed some light on that matter. I'm going to go through here what Rob Hunt, the UK sales director, shared with me in terms of setting up a subwoofer, and also my own personal take on things, how I'd tweak things a little bit here or there. Let's start with location. A lot of people advocate doing the subwoofer crawl. That's where you place the sub in your listening position, and because bass is omnidirectional, you can crawl along the floor to find the best location. REL's view is that that's pretty crude, and I tend to agree with them, although I do think it's a fairly good starting position if you've got that degree of flexibility about where you can place your sub. Most people don't. They only have 2 or 3 locations that would work, and I'd urge them to try all of those locations and see which works best. REL's general advice is to place the subwoofer in the corner. That's where you get the maximum boundary reinforcement. The subwoofer should play louder as well as a little bit lower. Normally you get a long throw diagonally across the room from that location, and that's the reason why. I think it works fine as far as home cinemas are concerned. That's where you get the maximum bang for your buck. But for two-channel listening, I'm not totally convinced. It can sound a little bit boomy. Normally somewhere along the sidewall works pretty well. The exact location, well, that's room and system dependent. But if you get it right, you can get much better integration with the main speakers. The first setting that you're going to want to adjust on your subwoofer is for phase. And this is where REL makes things really simple. There's just two settings, in and out of phase, 0 and 180 degrees. The correct setting is whichever setting is louder. That's the one that you want to use. And I applaud REL for not having a variable phase adjustment, because the likelihood is that people just wind up chasing their own tail, not knowing what's the correct setting. Getting the gain and crossover settings just right, well, that's a little bit more of an intricate process. What Rob did when he was initially setting up the subwoofer in my room was run it a little bit hot. That means set the gain and the crossover setting higher than where its final position is likely to be. That turned out to be around 15 clicks of each dial on the gain and the crossover in my room. There's 40 clicks to go all the way around. And then once we've decided that we've got a good location for the subwoofer, we started to make fine adjustments. And that's done by listening to reference tracks. A good starting point from REL's demo list is Jennifer Warnes' Ballad of the Runaway Horse. This is an audiophile classic, but it's not her glorious vocals that we're listening to in particular here, it's the accompanying double bass. Listen for the weight of that bass, its definition and variations in tone. A personal favourite of mine is Adam Ben Ezra, Can't Stop Running off his Pin Drop album. This is the acoustic version. It's a masterful double bass solo, but again, we're listening for the characteristics I just described. Don't worry if you can't remember all these tracks, I'll list them in the description to this video. Those two tracks alone should be able to get you fairly close, but if you want to do some further fine tuning, again, off REL's demo list is James Horner's soundtrack to Sneakers, track 4, called Cosmo My Friend. This is one that John Hunter himself, chief designer for REL, uses when setting up subwoofer systems. You want to crank it up a little bit and listen to the soft mallet striking the big symphonic drum and the resulting reverberation. It should be distinct but in the background. Another great track that I use for judging balance in the bass is Duke Ellington's Afro-Bossa from the album of the same title. He has his full orchestra here. It starts with his drummer and then the track builds. The full percussive elements come in later. You want to listen to the balance of those against the woodwind, the strings and the brass elements of the orchestra. I've also got a great track if you want to judge bass extension and sheer power, Pansonic's Current 1 off their Katodivaihe album. I'm sure I butchered that name. The bass should be strong, deep, expansive, perhaps even dominant, but not so much that it obscures other details. Finally, a track to reveal what a subwoofer can do in terms of revealing spatial cues within a recording. Bizet's Agnus Dei, performed by Jose Carreras of the Ramirez Misa Criolla album. This one again is off REL's demo list, and if you listen with or without a subwoofer, the difference is not subtle in terms of the choral beauty of the choir behind him coming shimmering through. The REL T7X clearly demonstrates how the subwoofer game has moved on in the last 20 years, comfortably outperforming my Strata III. It's a lot cleaner, a touch more dynamic, whilst offering similar levels of bass extension to its ancestor. No small feat for a subwoofer almost half its size. That's down to innovations in design, driver technology, and the fact that a lot more power is readily available these days, none of which I touched on in this review. I had enough to get through without getting into that, but that might be a discussion for a future time. Let me be frank here, I'm struggling to place the REL T7X. Could it be the benchmark product within its market segment? Quite possibly. In fact, my instincts tell me more than likely. And if it is, it deserves an outstanding award. That's what those awards are for. But as it stands today, I need to test a few more subwoofers before I can say that with any authority. What I can say very comfortably is that this is an extremely good subwoofer and it comes highly recommended from this channel. My question for today is, what's your experience of integrating subwoofers into two-channel hi-fi systems? I want to know about the good and the bad in the comments section. And if you haven't got any experience of doing that, let me know what subwoofers you might be interested in trying out and the reasons why. Love to hear about that too. All that remains for me to say is if you like what I'm doing with this channel and you want to see it grow and you haven't done so already, please do all that social media stuff. Hit the like button, share, subscribe and hit the bell notification so you know when new videos land. Check me out on Patreon for consultancy services, bonus content and also the video club meetings that we have from time to time. But for today, for now, a British audiophile signing off.